People make fun of me because they'll say, well, here's Chris Farrell, and he's going to talk to you about why you should work until you die, right? I mean, it's funny.
What would you say is the biggest myth about working later in life that you'd like to dispel?
Here's one of the big shocks. The 55 to 64-year-old age group. About a quarter of all new businesses in recent years has been formed by that age group.
One of the things that I'm seeing is a lot of skilled employees where the companies they're leaving don't want to lose their skills and experience. So they're saying, can we hire you as a consultant?
If you mention retirement, they immediately assume that means not working. And it has this image of moving to Florida or Arizona. The reality is,
hello and welcome to another episode of Your Retirement Planning Simplified. This episode, we had journalist and author Chris Farrell. So we talked about the kind of evolving concepts of what retirement is and how work and purpose and financial security can kind of all intersect in later life, right? So we touched on his books, most recent books, Purpose and a Paycheck and Unretirement. We talked about why many retirees are staying engaged in meaningful work beyond what would be considered like the typical retirement age. We talked about how longevity and technology are reshaping the traditional retirement. So a lot of things kind of on that, I guess, intersection of money and meaning, right? Which kind of aligns with what his books were talked about. So anyway, I think this is really valuable for anybody who's approaching retirement and starting to think about, what does that next phase look like? Do I just stop working, or should there be some kind of transition, or is this a time to take on some new projects maybe that I've always wanted to do? So it was a really good conversation. And, Chris is actually living this right now. So he is 71. He's still working and he's enjoying his career. So he's also an example of everything he's talking about.
Mm-hmm. Not only is he an author, he's a senior economics contributor at Minnesota Public Radio and Marketplace. And he's also columnist for PBS Next Avenue and Minneapolis Star Tribune. He is the host of Office Hours podcast for the Heller Hurwitz Economics Institute at the University of Minnesota. And he's written for Bloomberg Businessweek, New York Times, Kiplinger's, and as well as some other publications. And as you mentioned, Joe, he has 5 books, including The New Frugality, Unretirement, and Purpose and a Paycheck. And I'll link to those in the show notes.
And now he's been featured on Your Retirement Planning Simplified.
That's right. Resume. Yes, as well. Yeah.
All right. Enjoy the show, everyone. All right. Hello, Chris Farrell. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
That's great. Well, I'm happy to have you on the show today. As we were just talking about a little bit offline here, I know your experience and some of the writing you've done in the past will definitely be a good fit for our listeners. I think they'll probably get a lot of value out of our conversation today. So
I hope
so. Before we jump into some of the meat of our conversation, maybe you could just start by telling us a little bit about your current role at a Marketplace, and I believe you're at Minnesota Public Radio as well.
Yes. So I'm a journalist and I work for Minnesota Public Radio. And as you mentioned, Marketplace, and I'm senior economics contributor at both places. And basically, much of what I focus on is economics and personal finances. And of course, those two can blend depending on the topic and what we're talking about. And then I'm also a columnist for PBS Next Avenue, which is the online magazine targeted at the 50 plus. Demographic. I have a personal finance column in the Minnesota Star Tribune, and I do a variety of other things, but all in that journalism hat and all involving economics, personal finance, and I would say probably the last 10 years with a large focus on the aging of the population.
Okay. And so in that work, what's really drawn you to the personal finance and maybe that aging and retirement piece?
Well, I think, my journalistic career is economics and personal finance, and I love the economics. And the nice thing about the personal finance is that you're actually helping people, where it's very practical. And the economics is a little more of the ideas and the public policy and trying to understand what's going on. And if you think about the last 30 years or so with the baby boom population, that has been a large part of the focus. It's been a very negative story about the aging of the population. So you're going to have this giant generation, the baby boom population, but then it's going to be the ones that follow. And their standard of living is going to fall in retirement because they haven't saved enough. And that's been a standard story, a standard refrain. sort of in the whole area of finance. And then if you look at economics, it's about the dynamism of the economy is going to be undermined by the aging of the population. And there's no doubt the population is aging. The number that always gets me is in 2034, for the first time in U.S. history, there'll be more people 65 years and older than 18 and under. And so when there's this image of all these frail older people, with fewer and fewer younger people supporting them. So you had this negative vision on the finance side, you had this negative vision on the economic side, and yet markets fundamentally work. And you should never underestimate the creativity of people. You should never underestimate the creativity of entrepreneurs, and social entrepreneurs, for-profit entrepreneurs. And so I started just doing a lot of research, and it basically turns out there's a lot of research out there that says the negative story is wrong.
Okay. So I think that probably leads a little bit into the last couple of books you've read, but you've seemed to challenge that traditional retirement concept. So maybe you could talk a little bit more just in general about that theme.
So a couple things. And one, I want to be very clear, this is not a judgment call that says, working well into the traditional retirement years is the right thing to do, right? Some people, look, they got to retire. They need to retire. Other people, their health, working longer may not make sense. Other people are taking care of aging parents and younger children. So there's a lot of complexity and nuance in our lives. But when you think about creativity, innovation, we usually associate that with youth. And yet, when you look at artists, just look at artists, there are so many artists that as they get older, they become more and more creative. And there's this wonderful speech, it's worth everybody to read or to listen to, by the late Steve Jobs. They gave the commencement address at Stanford University. I believe it was in 2005. And he has this expression there. He says, you can only connect the dots by looking back. And a lot of what is creativity, it's connecting the dots and looking back and drawing on your experience. And so the notion that at age 50, you have nothing more to offer, but you're reliable. So we're not going to get rid of you right away, but you're reliable. You're on the downturn. You're not going to be creative. You're not going to be innovative. We have a tech problem or we have an organization. We're not going to invite you in the room because, you've checked out. It's completely wrong. It is just totally wrong. And so a lot of it is our institutions and our attitudes don't support people working longer. Now, odds are you don't want to be working any longer for 40 hours pay, but putting in 50 hours, right? You shouldn't be doing that anyway, but you really don't want to be doing that. So a lot of this is about being creative, part-time work, self-employment, starting your own business. I mean, here's one of the big shocks. The 55 to 64-year-old age group, about a quarter of all new businesses in recent years has been formed by that age group. And, we think, again, entrepreneurship, that's youth, that's, 24/7. Well, that's one particular vision of entrepreneurship that comes out of Silicon Valley. But there's lots of other kinds of entrepreneurship that are out there. So it's about creating opportunities. And then to your topic about what does this mean for your finances is, most of us haven't saved that much money. Your clients probably have, but if you look at the aggregate statistics, most people haven't. And not because they couldn't resist taking out that credit card when they went to the mall, or they just had to buy that car that they couldn't afford. But life is expensive. Children are expensive. You lose your job. You have a medical setback. There's all kinds of reasons why people don't have much savings. And working a little bit longer can make a big difference to your standard of living.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think when you're looking at this, do you think that this kind of shift in how people are approaching retirement, do you think it's more necessity driven, or do you think it's more just people having that freedom to do what they want now rather than put the 50 hours in for the 40-hour work week working for somebody else?
So I think for the bulk of people, it's both purpose and a paycheck, that you need both. There's a group of people for whom they have a lot of resources. They have wealth and they love what they do. They love work and they just do it because this is who they are. It's just integral to their image of themselves and it's fun. And then there's a group of people really important, look, it's about paying the bills. and you have no choice but to work. But the bulk of the people who are sort of in this unretirement community, they have skill, they have knowledge, experience, and this notion that at some arbitrary date, whatever date you want to pick, 60, 65, whatever date, that you just sort of say, hey, that's it. I'm never using this knowledge, skill, and experience again. I'm just walking away from it. A lot of people don't think that's attractive. At the same time, they may want to use their skills and their knowledge in a different sector of the economy, doing something in the let's say you were in the for-profit sector, maybe go over to the not-for-profit sector, or you were a longtime employee and you entered the world of self-employment. I mean, you want to keep the energy going, you want to keep learning things, but walking away from that skill and that knowledge, a lot of people don't want to do it.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. Now, we talked about kind of that entrepreneurship, but how are employers adapting to this trend of experienced workers wanting to stay engaged in the workforce?
I'd love to say that employers are increasingly enlightened. I don't think that is the case, but there is a fundamental shift going on. Age discrimination is real. Age discrimination is out there. Look, if you lose your job age 58, 62, it can be very hard to get another job through the traditional portals. We can get back to that because there are other ways that you can get a job, but through your traditional portals, it can be very hard to get jobs. So I don't want to say age discrimination isn't there, but age discrimination is in decline. And the reason why it's in decline is that the workforce isn't growing. So, you just think about we're entering a period, once you adjust for the ups and downs of the business cycle, that essentially companies are living in an environment of a tight labor market. And so increasingly, I think what's happening, if you're working in an office and, the CEO and CFO is walking by an older worker, instead of thinking, when is that person going to retire? They're starting to think, how can I keep this knowledge, skills, and experience around a little while longer? It's a fundamental shift in what's happening, but the backdrop is this tight labor market.
Okay, that makes sense. One of the things that I'm seeing is a lot of skilled employees, they're talking to us about their retirement planning, and then now they're grappling with the opportunity that they have where the companies they're leaving don't want to lose their skills and experience. So they're saying, okay, like, if you're going to retire, we don't want you to, but if you're going to, can we hire you as a consultant? Can you come on, for a limited hours every week or every month, work from wherever you want? But they're seeing the value in keeping those people around. So
they do. And that used to be like a small trend. And now it's gotten a lot broader.
Yeah, for sure. We're definitely seeing it quite a bit. Okay. What would you say, and maybe we've talked a little bit about this already, but what would you say is the biggest myth about working later in life that you'd like to dispel?
Well, people make fun of me because they'll say, well, here's Chris Farrell and he's going to talk to you about why you should work until you die. Right? I mean, it's funny. And it is really true that retirement was one of the great social innovations, the post-World War II period, Second World War II period. Because up until Social Security and Medicare and pensions, a lot of people they just had to keep working. So retirement was a great innovation, but we're a better educated society, and the generation behind me is better educated than the boomer generation. We're healthier on average. We live in an environment where, it'd be one thing if we were having this conversation back in the 50s and 60s when the commanding heights of the economy were smokestack America and the coal mining, the steel mills. Today, we live in an economy of services and information. And so it's easier to stay engaged in the workforce. And technology has lowered the cost of starting your own business. So there's some real changes in the economy and society that are pushing people to reevaluate how they think about this later stage of life. And on the other hand, there's pressure because, as said earlier, a lot of people haven't saved that much for retirement. I mean, the standard metric is you want to have saved enough that when you stop working, you can maintain your standard of living for the rest of your life. That's kind of, you have to have some kind of measure, some kind of metric. That's a standard metric in the personal finance industry. Well, a lot of people haven't saved enough in order to say, I'm confident that I can do that. Once they take the Social Security, what else they have. So there's also this pressure that half the private sector workforce doesn't have access to a retirement savings plan at work. And if you don't have a retirement savings plan at work, you don't have retirement savings. So there's a push and a pull there that's going on. And the net result is to push people toward working longer, part-time, self-employment. But if you're going to do that, why not do something that you enjoy?
Yeah. So maybe this is a good time to maybe jump into that whole idea of a purpose and a paycheck. So in that book, you talk about how purpose and a paycheck can go hand in hand. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so there's a wonderful book. It was published in the early 1970s by Studs Terkel, who was a great journalist, great radio journalist. And it's a very thick book. And he just interviewed people about their jobs. It's called Working. And there's a lot of jobs that don't exist anymore, like, elevator operator. But what's striking about the book is they were all sort of ordinary jobs. I think they were Pauline Kael, who wrote for the New Yorker, was kind of one of the unusual people in there. But most of the jobs, ordinary people doing ordinary jobs. But he has this introduction that's just really worth reading for everybody. And he said, all these interviews that I've done, and I think it's like a 800 page book. He says, all these interviews that I've done, there's a common theme. And the common theme is that people work because they want their daily bread. They got to pay their bills. He says, but everybody wants respect. Everybody wants to belong to a community. He didn't use the word purpose. I think he might have used the word meaning. But everybody wants to have some meaning in what they're doing. And this is true throughout a lifetime. And so in the society that we're moving into, and because we are living longer on average, because we are better educated on average, I think that purpose is fundamental to who we are. It's fundamental to why do you get up in the morning. But it doesn't matter what you earn. So purpose really does matter. It is fundamental to the human condition. At the same time, you got to pay the bills. And, the advantage of continuing to work, again, maybe part-time, maybe gig economy work, is what retirement savings you have is going to last longer. You can delay filing for Social Security, which can make an enormous difference in your Social Security benefit. You're not tapping your retirement savings, so it continues to grow. And frankly, you have to live less, or you have less time to live in terms, and I kind of stumbled over that one. You have to rely on your savings for less time.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just financially smart.
Yeah. No, I love that. And so in your work and writing about this and researching about the relationship between meaningful work and financial well-being, is there anything that really stuck out that surprised you?
I think the thing that surprises me, but why should it surprise me, is never underestimate how creative people are in coming up with ways to make money. I mean, when you have these sort of general conversations, people have a very limited view. So, I worked in an office and I managed 3 people and we got this paperwork done, and people think, well, that's all you can do. And what it turns out is people go, well, no, I'm actually really good at communicating and I'm very organized and I'm going to, I've always wanted to work in a national park. And so they'll do something like that. And so it's just how creative people are coming up with ways to make money and enjoy it, get their purpose out of it. And yet so much of our discussion is kind of very narrow, unimaginative. You can only do what you've been doing. And if you can only do what you've been doing, that actually might be the definition of misery. But I think most people are far more creative than that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'd agree 100%. Now, if we're, our listeners are getting closer to a transition or considering a transition, what's the first step towards finding that meaningful work in later life?
So the first step is give yourself some time. And, we always say that you need to plan. Plan is fundamental. It is very important. But you have a couple of resources that are really valuable to tap. First of all, take 5 minutes a day, just 5 minutes a day, and write down what it is you think you might want to do. Okay. Now, we're talking about a transition. It can be unrealistic. This is not literature. No one's judging how you write. No one's judging your grammar, but write that down. Then turn to your most valuable resource, which is your network. These are the people you've known over the years, former colleagues, friends, neighbors, people from your church or temple. People that you've gathered over the years, and start talking to them, particularly if they're near the age that you are. What do you think I'm good at doing? What do you think that I should do? And they'll really help you refine it, because we all have self-delusion. We all have notions that we're good at this, and they'll look at you and say, well, and they'll be very nice about it. But I say, well, empathy is not a real strength here. So you might want to put yourself in a situation where empathy is not the real skill you need in this job. All right. So they're going to help you. But the real value of that network is, once you get a better idea, what are your skills, what are your experience, what you might want to do, they're going to make the introductions. They're not going to get you the job, but they're going to help you make the connections that will get you that job. Third thing, years ago, I got this call from somebody, and it was a very, very nice person. And this was a couple, and they were thinking about getting into becoming landlords. They wanted to buy a fourplex. And what did I think of the idea? And it was involving their retirement. That's what they were sort of thinking about. I said, well, what do you know about being a landlord? I don't know anything about being a landlord. Well, have you talked to landlords? No, I haven't talked to landlords. I said, here's the thing. There's meetings of landlords every month. Talk to landlords. The thing about entrepreneurs is, if you go to an entrepreneur and you ask them questions, they'll tell you everything. They'll tell you even how they price it. They'll tell you what are the risks of the business. So do your research, do your fundamental research, because being a landlord can be a great business. It can also be a very, very difficult business, and it can be a nightmare. It's not a judgment call of whether they should have bought a fourplex or not bought a fourplex, but they shouldn't buy a fourplex unless they've done their research. So this is why what you're trying to do is not say, I am a journalist. Okay, that's my occupation. That's what I do. But it's more, what's my skill? What's my experience? What do I like doing? What do I want to say no to forever from this point on? Right? Which is very, very, was one thing I've learned from many entrepreneurs, that sometimes the most important decision you make is, what don't you want to do anymore? So give yourself time. There are lots of resources there. They don't cost you a lot of money. People do all kinds of information meetings with you, but you have to be proactive in order to figure out what's next. And then what's going to happen is, you're going to do that for 2 or 3 years. You're going to meet a new set of people. You're going to be exposed to a different environment, and you'll probably go, you know what? I actually want to go over here. But you've now met a group of people that will help you get over there.
Yeah, that's great. I think that also a lot of us are maybe we don't know all of our skills, or what we think we are good at is really not what we're the best at, but we do have these other skills that other people see in us that we don't see in ourselves, right? So I think that's a really good idea of tapping into your network for that alone, but obviously also for the connections to get going and whatever you think you might want to get started in. Do you have any particular example of someone who's done this really well, reinvented their career after age 50 or 60?
Well, there's a wonderful book by Lucy Kellaway, and she was a wonderful columnist at the Financial Times. She covered management. She was very, very good at poking holes in the verbiage of management about value added and leverage and all the terms that management tends to do. And she always had that sort of arched eyebrow. And she decided to become a teacher, and formed an organization, and she became a teacher. She's still a teacher, and she wrote a wonderful book that describes her experience about making the transition. And one of the most important points that she makes in that book is that she thought she was going to reinvent herself. Well, she's still Lucy Kellaway, but she's put herself into different circumstances. So she didn't reinvent herself. She's re-educating herself. And some of the things that she thought when she was a columnist at the Financial Times, that now she's working in an inner city school, she realizes how wrong she was and how dismissive she was of certain trends. So I think she's done a wonderful job of really making a transition and also writing really an interesting book about, you know, the foibles. But she has this important point in it where she begins to realize that when you make these transitions, when you're older, there's a certain freedom there. And you have knowledge, you have experience, but there's also freedom. And I think that's a really important point for people to absorb, that you can take risks. Go ahead and take that risk. You don't want to be foolish about it. I remember years ago, I would, say, oh, you can't start a business because you'd have to tap your 401k and not a good idea. Well, now I realize people aren't tapping their 401k. Average new business that somebody 55 plus is starting, it's like a $2,000 startup. Their office is a room in their home, or they join a co-sharing workspace. Technology has lowered the cost of doing business. So again, it's about being creative and innovative and realizing you have a lot of freedom.
Yeah, that was great. Like that freedom piece is something I think, everyone's looking for that security so that they eventually have the freedom. But if you've been working hard, and to your point, I mean, you don't have to be to the extent where that you could stop working and never work again, but just being willing to do something else, even if you're making a little bit of money, by not tapping so much into your savings and investments, you can take a little bit more risk because you're going to need your retirement savings for less time anyway.
That's right.
Are there any common elements you've noticed of successful career transitions?
I think it's like when thinking about creativity, if you're creative in your 20s and 30s, odds are you're going to be creative in your 60s and your 70s. It's just so, the common trait, if I were to boil it down to one word, is curiosity. And so long as you maintain your curiosity throughout your life, it doesn't mean your transitions are going to be successful. It doesn't mean you're going to be successful in life, but it means that you're going to be engaged with the world and you're willing to try different things. So I think the trait that is most important is be curious, stay curious, always be learning. It is the cliche, you can't teach no dogs new tricks, is fundamentally wrong and has been wrong for a long period of time. So learn new things, educate yourself, be curious, and a lot of good things come from that.
Okay. And now, we've talked about purpose and working later, but could we talk, and maybe this is the kind of the same thing, maybe it's a bit different, but the connection between work and happiness in later life?
So I think there's a couple of things. It's obviously the paycheck matters, or, getting some kind of earnings matters. But I think what's consistently underestimated is the social side of work. People care that you show up. You have colleagues. You like some of those colleagues. You don't like some of those colleagues. It's a community. And that is one of the most important things, because when you have retirement, there's this notion that you're going to create a whole new community. Well, the thing is, you can, but that takes a lot of work. The nice thing about a job, in many jobs, not all jobs, obviously some jobs are more isolating, but with jobs where you're with people, it's a multi-generational, it's intergenerational. There's all ages in there. It is a community. They care whether or not you show up. You get to gossip. You get to have coffee together. So I think that's the underestimated part of it, is it's a community, and to value that community. And for when you say goodbye to your colleagues for the last time, and we were talking about earlier about how do you prepare, how do you sort of plan for what I might want to do next, put at the top of your list, what's my community? What is my community when I say goodbye to the colleagues for the last time? Who is it going to be? Who am I going to have ice cream with on a Wednesday afternoon? Who am I going to go to the movies with Thursday night? Think through those things really carefully, because it turns out for a lot of people, once they walk away from work, they realize they had work friends and they have some other friends. But many of us, our friends are scattered all over the country. You may get to see them every once in a while, but maybe not. So take that community aspect really seriously.
So obviously work is definitely, it creates that social network, which is not easily duplicable. It's a tough one for me. After work, could you expand a little bit on the importance of having a social network?
Well, one of the big risks as you get older is being lonely and social isolation. And connections really matter, because with connections, people care about you. And I was interviewing this person, and she was saying that she had an illness and she ignored it, and she's okay. She's fine, but it was worse than she expected. And she said the thing is, she had nobody that was saying, "Hey, go to the doctor. Hey, what did the doctor say? Hey, are you doing your exercises?" And so these social connections, we're social creatures. And we live in a society, we're a very age segregated society. And yes, there's technology, and we're having this conversation through technology, but technology is not a substitute for face-to-face interaction.
Yeah.
So one of the things where this becomes, I think, very important, and you probably run into this all the time, there's this expression, everybody wants to age in place. They want to age in their home. This is what they want to do. They got the memories. Every room has a memory. This is what they're comfortable with. Anyone who's moved knows it's an absolutely miserable experience. So why would you move unless you have to? But I would really like people to change that and say, no, you want to age in community. And what is your community surrounding your home? And if your home is fairly isolated or hard to get to or difficult to get to, think about, well, should I be moving within my community, but in a place where it's easier to get around? Because one of the things that gets harder as you get older is just getting around. So it's the connection, it's the conversation. Earlier, we were talking about curiosity and learning. Well, you learn from conversation, you learn from people. So you don't want to age lonely. You don't want to age isolated.
Yeah. And maybe I would just add to that, just from experience with clients. So, we have a lot of retiree clients. As is often the case, the female often outlives the male in a lot of couples. And so without fail, what I've seen every time we've had a client who has gone ahead and sold the house and moved into like a retirement community, and often they've put it off for many years, and then they finally do it with some urging from family members and friends. Once they get into a retirement community and they come back to see us, they're like a changed person. They have a new light about them and energy, and it's you could just see that impact of having that daily social connection and the ability to get out and make new friends and have those conversations, everything you're just talking about. Okay. So as we kind of wind down a little bit here, as you're looking into the future, are there any major changes that you see coming to how we approach retirement, or just kind of more of what we're already talking about?
Well, I think we're still very early in this rethinking, reimagining retirement. I mean, if you mention retirement, I'm sure you do that with all your clients, they immediately assume that means not working.
Yeah.
Right? You do full-time leisure. And it has this image of moving to Florida or Arizona, parts of Texas. That image is there. Now, the reality is many people, in fact, now I believe it's a majority of people who are retired or retiring, has some kind of bridge job, something that kind of bridges from what they did before to entering in this retirement years. People moving is way down, and typically most people move within the area where they are currently living, often for very good reasons, because there may be family nearby, children nearby, grandchildren nearby, or just these are my friends. Don't want to pick up and go elsewhere. And companies, organizations still have this image of this worker is working for us. This worker is now retired. And you had mentioned earlier about more and more companies saying, "Hey, can we stay connected?" And I was I was talking to somebody at a major company, and they were saying that they now call their former employees alumni, and they have an alumni association. And again, they tap into their resources. Sometimes you come back. So we're really early, and what a lot of the sort of cottage industry people were thinking about this. What I think the hope is right now, it's all experimentation. When you retire and you're working for a private sector company and you have a 401k at work and you say, I'm going to retire, they hand you, it's probably online, but they may hand you the 401k packet. Tells you what you got, what you can do, all this. There's no packet that says, here are some of your options when you retire. It hasn't been institutionalized. And so we're still kind of experimenting about what does this mean? What really works? I think the telework really opens up some opportunities for people who, they may not want to commute anymore to work for a variety of reasons, maybe physical, may just be more difficult, but maybe they can make some money just doing some telework part-time. So it's a period of massive experimentation and rethinking and reimagining the later stage of life.
Yeah, that's great. And then on a more on a personal question, what has changed in your kind of outlook for retirement and doing all this work over the years?
I'm still engaged and still enjoying. I'm 71 and I'm still enjoying writing about it, talking to people about it, thinking about it. So I don't have any plans to stop doing that.
Awesome. That's great. You're living the message. I love that. And maybe, sorry, we're going to say something there? Okay. So I appreciate your time today. I know our listeners are going to get a lot out of this. Before we wrap it up, where can listeners learn more about you and learn more about these concepts we've been talking about if they want to take a deeper dive?
Yeah, so there's a variety of ways. It's Minnesota Public Radio, NPR.org, Marketplace.org. I have a website, which I'm very bad about keeping up, but it gives you some options, chrisfarrell.net. And if you Google Chris Farrell journalist, you'll come upon a lot of my stuff.
Perfect. So we'll get all that, including the books you mentioned earlier, into the show notes for listeners, retirementplanningsimplified.ca. Chris, thanks for joining us today. I appreciate it.